I'm not the type of person who scares easily. In fact, I've always been the one in my group of friends to push boundaries, to laugh in the face of fear. But the night of that truth or dare game, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at things the same way again. What happened wasn't some paranormal event, no ghosts or haunted houses, but the realness of it. That's what makes it so terrifying. It was late September, a cool Friday night, and I was hanging out with a group of friends at Jake's cabin. Jake had convinced his parents to let us borrow the place for the weekend. It was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods and far from any neighbors. Perfect for a night of drinking, stupid games, and a little bit of fun. There were 6 of us: me, Jake, Emma, Lucas, Sarah, and Ben. We had known each other since high school, and while we drifted apart a bit since then, this was one of our attempts to relive the old days. A few beers in, someone suggested we play Truth or Dare. It was childish, sure, but with the alcohol flowing, none of us objected. At first, the dares were harmless. Jake dared Emma to chug half a bottle of wine, which she did without hesitation. Sarah was dared to run outside in nothing but her bra and underwear, which had everyone howling with laughter. But as the night wore on, the dares started getting bolder, a little more dangerous. People were revealing old secrets during the truth rounds. Nothing too wild, but it was obvious we were building up to something. Then came my turn. I sat there, feeling the buzz of the alcohol mixing with the tension in the air. Emma, sitting across from me, smirked as she thought of a dare. Her eyes locked with mine, and I knew she was about to take things up a notch. "All right, truth or dare?" she asked. I was already on edge from the previous round, so I chose what I thought was the safer option. Truth. Her smirk widened. "What's your biggest fear?" It felt like a cop out at first. Out of everything, she asked that. But as I sat there thinking about it, I realized I didn't have a quick answer. I didn't have a phobia, like heights or spiders. What really scared me was something deeper, something harder to put into words. I paused, thinking carefully. I guess my biggest fear is losing control of my life, my choices, being at the mercy of someone else's decisions, feeling trapped, unable to get out. The room went quiet for a second. Maybe the alcohol was amplifying the weight of my words, but it felt heavy. Everyone just kind of nodded, letting the moment pass before moving on. The next few rounds went by, more ridiculous dares and some awkward truths, but the game kept coming back to me. After a few more turns, it was Jake's turn to ask me again. "Truth or dare, man?" Jake asked, his voice a little slurred but playful. I was done with truths. I didn't want to open up like that again, so I figured a dare would be safer this time. "Dare." Jake grinned mischievously. "I dare you to break into the old Miller house." Now, the Miller house was infamous in our town. It wasn't haunted, but it was where Old Man Miller had killed his wife about a decade ago. He'd gone to prison for it, but the house had been abandoned ever since. People swore it was creepy, but mostly because it had just been sitting there, rotting and forgotten. "Come on, that place is like a 5-minute walk through the woods," I said, trying to laugh it off. "And it's probably locked up." Jake shook his head. "Nope, I checked earlier. There's a broken window in the back. All you have to do is go inside, grab something to prove you were there, and come back. Easy." The group started egging me on. The beers had gotten to me, and I didn't want to be the one to back down. So with my heart pounding a little too hard, I agreed. Jake handed me a flashlight, and I headed out into the woods. The cold air hit my face as soon as I stepped outside, and the further I walked from the cabin, the quieter everything got. The laughter and chatter from my friends faded behind me, replaced by the sound of my own footsteps crunching on leaves. The Miller house came into view quickly. It was more run down than I remembered, its roof sagging and windows dark like empty eyes. I made my way around the back and found the broken window Jake had mentioned. The glass had been shattered, leaving a jagged hole just big enough for me to squeeze through. I crawled inside, landing softly on the dusty wooden floor. The smell hit me first, damp, moldy, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. The room I was in looked like it had once been a kitchen, but everything was old and falling apart. I shone my flashlight around, looking for something to take back with me. My heart was racing, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The house was deathly quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. I didn't plan on staying long. I spotted an old, rusted spoon on the counter. That would do. I grabbed it, ready to head back when I heard something. A creak, like a footstep, coming from deeper in the house. I froze. My first thought was that Jake or someone else had followed me, trying to scare me. But when I called out, there was no response. My breath caught in my throat. The creaking continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking toward me. I hurried back toward the window, but before I could reach it, a figure stepped into the kitchen doorway. It was Ben. I let out a breath, my nerves calming down instantly. "Jesus, man, you scared the hell out of me. What are you doing here?" But Ben didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "What the hell, Ben?" I said a little louder now, but something was wrong. His eyes were empty. He looked at me like he didn't even recognize me. Then, with terrifying calm, he pulled a knife from behind his back. I staggered backward, dropping the flashlight. The room went dark. My mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. Ben wasn't like this. This wasn't a prank. I scrambled for the window, feeling for the ledge in the dark. I could hear Ben's footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I barely managed to pull myself through the window, cutting my hands on the broken glass. I didn't stop. I ran, faster than I've ever run in my life, crashing through the trees back to the cabin. When I burst through the door, panting and bleeding, everyone looked up at me, startled. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it. "What the hell happened?" Jake asked, standing up. "Ben!" I shouted, my voice shaking. "He's got a knife." Jake frowned, looking confused. "Dude, what are you talking about? Ben's been passed out on the couch for the last hour." I turned, and sure enough, there was Ben, snoring softly, a half-empty bottle of beer next to him. My mind spun, trying to make sense of it, but I knew what I had seen. And what scared me the most? I still had the spoon in my hand. There's a moment when you realize you've crossed a line, when everything you thought was just a game turns into something far darker. I didn't know it at the time, but the night we decided to play Truth or Dare at Andrew's house was the night everything changed. It was supposed to be a fun reunion. College had scattered our group of high school friends across different states, and this was our first time all being back together. Andrew, the ringleader of our group, suggested we meet at his place, a huge house out in the suburbs, far enough from town that we wouldn't have to worry about neighbors complaining about noise. We were all excited to catch up, to drink, to relive some of the old memories. There were 5 of us: Andrew, myself, Claire, Ryan, and Jessica. We'd been close back in high school, a tight-knit group, but time had changed things. Relationships had frayed, and there were tensions no one really talked about. But Andrew, in his usual charming way, managed to pull us all back together. We were sitting in Andrew's basement, a large space that could have been a living room on its own. The lights were dim, and we had just finished our second round of drinks when Ryan suggested it. "Let's play Truth or Dare," he said, smirking like he had something up his sleeve. I laughed at first. "Come on, man." "No, seriously," Ryan pressed. "We're all adults now. Let's make it interesting." I could see Andrew's eyes light up. "Yeah, let's do it. High stakes, no backing out." Claire, always the cautious one, looked hesitant. "High stakes? What do you mean?" Andrew leaned forward, a mischievous grin on his face. "I mean, we don't play this half-assed. You pick a truth, you tell the whole truth. Pick a dare, you do the dare no matter what. No limits." It seemed like a bad idea, but the drinks had loosened everyone up. Even Claire eventually shrugged, muttering, "All right, whatever." We started off easy. Claire picked truth, and Ryan asked her about her most embarrassing high school moment. She reluctantly told the story about tripping in front of her entire class during a presentation. It was harmless, fun, and we all laughed. But then it was Jessica's turn. She picked dare. Andrew, never one to play it safe, grinned devilishly. "I dare you to text your ex and tell him you still love him," Andrew said, leaning back smugly. Jessica rolled her eyes. "Really? Come on," Andrew shrugged. "Hey, no backing out. Those are the rules." We all waited, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. Jessica looked annoyed, but she pulled out her phone, typed something, and pressed send. "Done," she said, tossing her phone onto the table. The rest of us laughed, but I could see the irritation simmering beneath her calm exterior. As the game went on, the truths became more personal, the dares riskier. Ryan was dared to shotgun 3 beers in a row, which left him stumbling and slurring his words. Claire was asked to reveal who she had a crush on in high school, which resulted in awkward glances across the room. Andrew, of course, was loving it all, pushing each person harder, getting bolder with each round. Then it was my turn. I dodged anything too bad up until now, mostly picking truths and keeping my answers vague. But this time, I was feeling reckless. The alcohol had blurred my sense of caution, and I decided to go all in. "Dare," I said, the word coming out before I could stop myself. Andrew's grin widened. "All right," he said, pausing dramatically. "I dare you to break into Mrs. Lawson's house." The room went dead silent. Mrs. Lawson was our old high school teacher, one of the strictest and most no-nonsense teachers we'd ever had. She was infamous for failing half the class senior year in her AP history course. But what made this dare especially messed up was that Mrs. Lawson's husband had died a few months back, and she lived alone now. "That's messed up, man," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not going to break into some poor widow's house." Andrew's smile didn't fade. "Come on, it's just a dare. You don't actually have to steal anything. Just sneak in, grab something small, and get out. We won't say a word to anyone." "I don't know, Andrew," Claire said quietly. "That's really not cool." But Andrew's charm was relentless. He knew how to push the right buttons. "Look, it's just a game. You don't want to be the one who backs out, do you? Besides, it's just a harmless little break. What's the worst that could happen?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. I don't know why. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe I didn't want to look like a coward in front of everyone. But I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and headed out the door. Andrew handed me his car keys. "She lives just a few blocks away. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. The night air was cool as I drove through the dark streets. My heart was pounding, and I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle in my chest. This wasn't a harmless dare. It was illegal, and Mrs. Lawson didn't deserve this. But I was already in too deep. When I pulled up to Mrs. Lawson's house, I sat in the car for a few moments, just staring at the darkened windows. The house was quiet, the lights off. I told myself it would be quick. I'd sneak in through the back, grab something small, anything, and leave before she even knew I was there. I parked a few houses down and crept through the backyard, my hands shaking as I approached the back door. It was unlocked. I slipped inside, the quiet of the house pressing down on me. My breath was shallow, every creak of the floorboards echoing in my ears. I found myself in the kitchen. Everything looked untouched, like she hadn't been using the space much since her husband passed. I opened a drawer, grabbed a small silver spoon, and turned to leave. That's when I heard the voice. "Who's there?" My blood ran cold. It was Mrs. Lawson, standing at the top of the stairs. She was holding a phone in her hand, her face partially lit by the glow of the screen. "I'm calling the police," she yelled, her voice trembling. "Wait, no," I said, panic rising in my throat, but she wasn't listening. I bolted for the back door, my heart racing, and I sprinted back to the car, the sound of sirens already starting in the distance. I sped back to Andrew's house, my mind in overdrive, trying to figure out what the hell I'd just done. When I burst back into the basement, breathless and panicked, Andrew and the others were laughing. "I told you he'd do it," Andrew said, slapping Ryan on the back. They all looked so relaxed, so unaware of what had just happened. But as I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I noticed something strange. Andrew's phone was on the table, and the screen was lit up with a message. It was from Mrs. Lawson. "Just called the cops. He's on his way back." I stared at Andrew in horror as the truth sunk in. This had all been planned. The dare, the break in, everything. Andrew had set me up. They all had. And now the sirens were getting closer. There are some moments you regret long after they've passed, when the weight of your choices sinks in, and you realize you've crossed a line you can never step back from. I never thought that a simple game of truth or dare could lead to something so terrible. But that's the thing. When the stakes get high enough, it stops being a game. It was a Friday night, and my girlfriend Katie had dragged me to a party at her friend Rachel's house. I wasn't in the mood, but Katie insisted it would be fun. I didn't know Rachel or most of her friends, but it was supposed to be a small gathering. Just drinks, some music, maybe a little dancing. I figured I could suck it up for a few hours. Rachel's house was huge, one of those McMansions in the suburbs with an open floor plan and spotless white walls. The kind of place where everything felt a little too clean, too perfect. We arrived late, and by the time we walked in, there were about a dozen people scattered around the living room, lounging on the couches, sipping drinks, and laughing loudly. I recognized a few faces from town, but most were strangers to me. After a few awkward introductions, Katie and I grabbed drinks, and I tried to settle in. It wasn't long before someone, Rachel, I think, suggested we play a game. Something to liven things up. "Let's do truth or dare," she said, grinning mischievously. It's been a while since we did something really fun. There was a chorus of agreement, and before I knew it, we were sitting in a circle on the floor, like we were teenagers again. I remember feeling a little uneasy, but I didn't want to be the downer of the group. Besides, it's just truth or dare, right? How bad could it get? The first few rounds were harmless. Rachel dared Katie to do a shot of tequila, which she handled like a pro. Another girl named Jenna admitted to cheating on an exam back in college during her truth. Everyone was laughing, enjoying the easy, playful atmosphere. But as the night wore on, the alcohol flowed more freely, and the dares started getting edgier, the truths more revealing. When it was my turn, I chose dare, feeling emboldened by the beer in my hand. Rachel grinned like she'd been waiting for this. "All right," she said, leaning forward, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I dare you to go upstairs and steal something from my parents' bedroom." I froze for a second, laughing nervously. "Wait, seriously?" "Yep. Go upstairs, grab something, anything from their room, and bring it back here. Bonus points if it's something embarrassing." Everyone started egging me on, and before I knew it, I was on my feet, heading for the stairs. I wasn't thrilled about rummaging through someone's personal stuff, but the booze and the pressure from the group pushed me forward. Rachel's parents weren't home. They were away for the weekend, which is why she'd been able to throw the party in the first place. Still, it felt wrong, trespassing into someone's private space. As I walked up the stairs, the laughter and chatter from the group faded behind me, and everything seemed to quiet down. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit, the only light coming from a small lamp at the far end. I found the master bedroom easily enough. The door was slightly ajar, and when I pushed it open, the room was dark, except for the soft glow from the city lights coming in through the window. I hesitated, standing in the doorway, unsure of what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest, and suddenly the whole thing felt a lot less funny. But I couldn't back down now. I walked over to the dresser and opened the top drawer, socks neatly folded. Not exactly what I was looking for. I moved to the next drawer, underwear. I smirked, thinking this would probably get the biggest laugh, and grabbed a lacy bra, stuffing it into my pocket. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something else, an envelope, hidden beneath a pile of clothes. Curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew what I was doing, I had it in my hands. It was thick, full of papers. I knew I shouldn't look. This was private, clearly not meant for prying eyes. But something about it called to me, a strange sense of foreboding creeping up my spine. I pulled out the stack of papers and flipped through them. My eyes skimmed over the words at first, legal language, formal, impersonal. But then a phrase jumped out at me, adoption termination agreement. I froze, my brain struggling to process what I was reading. Adoption termination? I kept flipping through the pages, my hands trembling now. I saw Rachel's name and something else. A date. A recent one. The reality hit me like a punch to the gut. Rachel wasn't who she said she was. She wasn't their real daughter. She'd been adopted, and recently at that. But this wasn't just some normal adoption paperwork. This was an agreement to terminate it. Her parents were planning to give her up. I stood there in stunned silence, the papers clutched in my hands, my mind spinning. What the hell had I just stumbled upon? Suddenly, there was a creak behind me. I spun around to see Rachel standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was suffocating. "What are you doing?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was laced with anger. I didn't mean to. I stammered, shoving the papers back into the envelope. I was just doing the dare. She stepped into the room, her eyes locked on the envelope in my hands. You weren't supposed to see that. I'm sorry, I didn't know. You weren't supposed to see that, she repeated, her voice colder now. Before I could respond, she lunged at me. I stumbled backward, dropping the envelope, and she grabbed it off the floor, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. Rachel, I didn't mean... You need to leave, she said, cutting me off, her voice low and shaking. Now. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to apologize, to explain that I hadn't meant to uncover whatever dark secret she was hiding. But the look in her eyes, the raw fury, the desperation, told me that staying any longer would be a mistake. I backed out of the room, my heart racing. I could hear the muffled laughter of the others downstairs, blissfully unaware of what had just happened. When I reached the top of the stairs, I heard Rachel's voice behind me, quiet but sharp. If you tell anyone about this, you'll regret it. I didn't need to be told twice. I hurried down the stairs, grabbed my jacket, and made a hasty exit. Katie called after me, confused, but I couldn't face her or anyone else. As I drove away, my mind kept replaying the look on Rachel's face, the venom in her voice. It wasn't the dare that had terrified me. It was realizing how easily someone's life can unravel, and how far they're willing to go to keep the truth buried.